Law firm renewal agreement.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is for our a renewal agreement with the law firm Nelson Mullins. I bring them before you for consideration for renewal, as they too have demonstrated their wherewithal and caliber and capacity and support of the DeKalb County School District, and probably one of their most meaningful accomplishments, I would believe, is picking up the ball, so to speak, during the superintendent search process, and actually stepping in and doing an excellent job of carrying that process to its conclusion and fruition, which delivered me to you. And so, in that regard, I'd like to present to the board that they be considered for renewal of their agreement with us.
Thank you. Well said, Mr. Superintendent. Is there any is there any discussion, Mr. Orson?
So I had, with no intent, because I support us renewing our agreement with our firm, and we do appreciate their stepping in, particularly in the midst of our search process. I did share one question I had about. It was about some language in the actual retainer agreement and about assignments, which I'm happy to defer as long as we can approve the agenda item and then address it somewhere before we have a final execution on the agreement, because I'd asked for some information about how work is assigned to our general counsel in other districts in which our general counsel also serves as general counsel, and I had not seen an answer come back on that yet. Okay.
Which you want to mention what it was? Or
yeah. So there's, you know, we work collectively as a board. We're a body of 7.
You want to discuss it in executive session? Or?
I don't want to elevate it above what it is either. I just would like to see sort of what the comparable standards are. This is really sort of, it's slightly in the weeds, other than the fact that the legal relationship technically is owned by the Board of Education. So I just wanted to be first better informed how other districts assign work and engage with general counsel, both collectively as a board and as individual board members, because at the time we entered in the contract, we did, and we rushed, and I don't think we didn't pay as much attention to that level of detail. And I just think this is the moment, and that's my only question. There's one sentence in the engagement letter that I'd like to be better informed about as a board member and collectively as a board. And so if we could get, again, I don't mean that as an, I have no opposition to approving the agenda item. I'd just like to ask us to clarify some of this language, which can be post this approval, but before we actually execute an agreement. And we're not really, we're just approving the action item, not the actual form or contract, because it's not in our book here. So if that would be agreeable.
Is that?
So it's not an objection to us retaining them, because we should have them. I just want to look at that one sentence about how work is assigned and how board members interact with the law firm.
Ms. Turner.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Are you requesting a copy of the formal contract?
Well, I think the language hadn't changed, so what I was really requesting was some reference points from, in part, how our general counsel and how that language or comparable languages operates in terms of some of the other districts that they represent, because that may inform exactly how we want to operate. So it's really the kind of the minutia of it, but I think it's important. It's an important issue that we didn't address a year ago for various reasons that I think we should address.
Are you saying that you want to shadow, or you want the language to be exactly like some other school district that's not related to, all school districts don't do business with?
I understand, but I need a reference. I'm a little uncomfortable with how the language currently reads, and so perhaps my discomfort is outside the realm of norm, and that's fine, but a good reference point would be to see how some of the adjacent districts address this issue about how work is assigned, and the only way, that seems to me to be a reference point. Whether we follow it or not is different, but I'm kind of operating somewhat in a vacuum without having it. The language that we currently have, which seems to, I think, perhaps unduly limit board members' interaction with our own general counsel. I mean, that may not have been the intent, but I think it's one possible reading. So I just would like some reference points, so that, and at the end of the day, we may say what we have is perfectly fine, but I don't have a reference point to compare it to.
And let me jump in, Mr. Orson. I'm happy to have that discussion with you offline. Okay. And there are certain, particular circumstances that vary from school district to school district, such that, retainer agreements can't really functionally be identical from one to the other, but I'm happy to have that discussion with you offline.
With your permission, Dr. Green, board members, I'd be happy to try and address a couple of those issues, maybe in general terms. Depending specifically on what you have in mind, Mr. Orson, your policy BAB might curtail the ability of individual board members to reach out directly to the general counsel, particularly with the language in BAB that says in the event a fee is to be incurred, then there prescribes a particular route by which that work would have to be obtained from the general counsel. So if you were contemplating that individual board members would reach out directly to the general counsel, then it may be necessary to consider some policy revisions to BAB to begin with.
Right. And so I just want to have sort of a comprehensive understanding of this, and it seems to me, to the chairman's point, I appreciate every district is a little different, but they're at least a good place to understand the comparison, and it may be perfectly fine. It was the one issue that concerned me last year, but we were in the midst of significant changes, and we didn't really focus on it. And I think there's an opportunity to at least revisit it, and we may come up with the same answer in terms of that language.
Dr. Irwin? No, Ms. Turner?
Just one quick question. The retainer fee that is in Part 1 and the retainer fee that is in Part 2, have they stayed the same?
Yes, they have. We are not proposing any increase in rates.
Thank you.
Mr. McNeil?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Mr. Jester, followed by Dr. Irwin.
Do you want to go ahead, Dr. Irwin?
I just had something quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
When they have the discussion with Mr. Orson, if we could get that out to the rest of the board, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Now, what are we, so I'm clear, Mr. Orson, where are we now in terms of what?
I have no objection to this agenda item. I would just ask, as a matter of courtesy, that we not execute the agreement until we at least have a chance, till we have a chance to look at that language. And,
okay.
Right, but as an agenda item, which is, I support us renewing our services agreement with Nelson Mullins, just to make that clear to our lovely and wonderful and very talented lawyers up there, I support it.
And I do just want to point out that the current retainer agreement expires tomorrow. And while we would never, ever, ever leave this district in the lurch and would continue to provide good service, I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that.
Mr. Jester.
The renewal agreement in question was emailed to us last week. For posterity, I was hoping we could get that agreement out on e-boards so in the future we can look at this agreement. That'd be possible.
It's not a privileged document, so it's certainly possible to make that publicly available.
Fantastic. And when is this contract scheduled to be bid out again?
Next year.
Next year? Okay. Philosophically, I'm against extending contracts that aren't bid out, but I understand where you're coming from. And I have a question for Dr. Bell on this. The letter of engagement says on the 10th day, DCSD will effectively cut Nelson Mullins a check for $65,000 and one for $25,000. And I've seen those on the vendor spend reports, right?
Yes, sir.
And so that happens every month?
No, sir.
When does it not happen? I don't understand that part.
The law firm in question submits an invoice to the Office of Legal Affairs. The Office of Legal Affairs will review the invoice and then get signature by the chief legal officer and the superintendent, and in some months in the past, that didn't happen strictly in accordance with the time schedule. Also, the agreement is there is a retainer, but they bill against the retainer. And so because of that, you can't just say it's going to be exactly this amount of money every month. So sometimes there is a lag, and we don't specifically accrue against the retainer because it's billed against. It's not an exactly known number.
Did you say that we're invoiced on that retainer, and that's when we send it?
No, I said we get an invoice from the law firm, and they bill against the retainer, so the number does vary somewhat or could vary somewhat. And then as the Office of Legal Affairs initiates the payment process, it goes through the payment process, and it comes to finance. When if everything is in order, then we would pay it out of accounts payable.
Gotcha. So on the 9th or whatever, or however many days before that, you kind of true up how much you owe them or don't owe them, and then what's left, that minus the $65,000 is, or $65,000 minus that is what you send them. Whatever's left over from the previous month.
Well, it depends upon how they structure the invoices. A lot of times the law firms, if they didn't get paid in the prior month because they didn't submit or something, they'll total that up and show a total amount payable.
Anyway, there's a lot of truing up going on, and it's possible that on some months we don't send them that, which means on some months we might not have legal fees whatsoever coming up on the monthly report.
If it turns out that the law firm in question didn't do anything and we'll say zero for the retainer, I don't think I've seen that yet.
So I would say earlier this year there were 2 or 3 months where we had 0 legal fees.
Okay.
So that would be the case then, right?
I'd have to go back and take a look at those specific months in terms of the timing of the processing and that type of thing, Mr. Jester.
Okay, thank you.
No further discussion. Is there any opposition to placing this item on the consent agenda for this evening? Hearing none, this item will be placed on the consent agenda for this evening.